All right, we're about to get started here. So the plan today, for anyone watching this in the future, is I'm going to be working on the monthly adventure that I write for my patrons over on Patreon. And normally that's a dungeon, but I thought I'd do something a little different today. I had the idea of creating a 6-mile hex. That means a hexagon that's 6 miles across. Those are pretty standard if you're doing like a hex crawl. But in typical hex maps, there's not a lot of detail in each of them. And what I've always wanted is 6-mile hexes that have a lot of detail and specificity and as to what's actually going on inside them. So as players travel through them, the GM can give them lots of information. Maybe there's a little adventure going on inside it. So that's what I'm going to be working on. Hopefully you guys are going to enjoy this preview of it. And the PDF is going to go out to patrons eventually, hopefully in the next day or two. Let's make sure this is set up here. All right, so basically, let me get a pencil here. It's going to be a big hexagon, and I want this to be focused on a mountain. So there's going to be a big mountain right in the middle of it. And the mountain's going to take up pretty much the whole hex. And that's about the right size. I did some research, and for example, Mount Hood in the Pacific Northwest, which is where I grew up, could easily fit inside a 6-mile hex. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to try and rough out about how big this is going to be. I want the hexagon to sort of fill up most of the page, so I have room to add detail about what's going on inside it and have a lot of, good amount of detail on the mountain itself. Okay. So let's start with a fairly large pen to get the rough outlines here. Here's our mountain. Want to be able to see most of it. The back of it is not very visible, but each of these different quadrants I think is going to be relevant because I have a plan for that. Let's get a smaller size pen here. Add some snow around the top. Let's go with something like... Now I've sort of roughed out basically what I want the adventure to be. It's not so much an adventure as a bunch of connected locations and destabilizing elements. Ways that things can suddenly go sideways if tampered with by the players, which is something I really like. That's roughly where our snow line is. I'm not trying to go super professional or exacting with this, because I'm really just sort of figuring out where everything is. Okay. And sort of get roughly where my main locations are going to be. So what I want is I want a bunch of different factions sort of messing around here, which I really like in any RPG. I like having a dynamism to it, where there's different actors with their own agendas messing around and doing their own thing. So hopefully my patrons like that. I did something like that with the last adventure I made for patrons, and they seem to enjoy that. It makes it so that when you run into people, they're not just static. They have goals, and they're often interacting with the other factions. So what I'm imagining here is that there's going to be two factions of bandits. So one main faction with like a camp, and a breakaway group. So a smaller group that's broken away from the main group and is trying to do their own thing, and are maybe in conflict with the main bandit group, right? There's been a split. And there's also going to be a third faction, which is a bunch of rangers who are supposed to patrol this area and are having to deal with this influx of bandits. So let's see here. Let's put some bandits. Main bandit camp is going to be right over here. And then I want the rival camp over here. And the Rangers outpost is down here somewhere near the base of the mountain. And there's a couple other features too. There is a tower up here. So let me sort of get that in there. There's a large tree that I'll start filling in later over on this side of the mountain. Just way over here. There's a tomb over here. There's going to be a river going this way. And I'm going to find a way to connect all of these things. So I want a river going down here. Maybe the river kind of moves along in that direction. Yeah, so the whole hex is going to be this one big mountain, Matthew. Oh, thanks, James. James pointing out that he's going to pick up some t-shirts. That's awesome. I started making a few t-shirts. I put them on the t-shirt store. It's going to be down in the description below. And some people are buying them, which is really cool. I've been seeing pictures of them show up on Twitter. So it's really cool to see something that I designed show up in the real world. All right, let's have a river. A lot of runoff from the mountain going in this direction. There's going to be a waterfall right here. The river goes off in that direction. Now, most of this is going to be heavily forested. So I may start adding the forests in later, but let's try and figure out what these objects are. So let's start with the tree over here. So this tree is going to be kind of a weird thing. It's a large tree, and it has tons of swords and knives stuck into it. That sort of popped into my head as just like a cool visual. And then I started building off that a little bit, right? You sort of get a couple cool visuals, some cool things, and you go through them and you try and connect them up, and you figure out, you add one or two interesting things to them, and then they slowly grow over time. So that's the Tree of Swords. Let's put it over here. It's going to be a tree full of knives. Stuck into it. One of the swords is actually going to be really important. It's going to be the sword of a character who died over here. There's going to be a tomb right here. And by examining the tomb, you're going to be able to figure out which sword in here was his sword. And that's going to be relevant for something else. But I don't want to have it just be that. Perhaps there's more knives or swords in here that have special abilities. That's like a pretty good idea. Maybe there's a random chance of getting a magic sword. Why this tree is full of swords stuck into it is totally unexplained. I'll just leave that up to the GM. One thing is that you really don't need to have detailed explanations for everything that a character does or everything that is true in your world. You can just put weird stuff in there and let players kind of mull over it and figure out why they think it's happening, why they think it's there. The sword with the blossoming hilt is, what was his name? The sword of Saint Festus. There is a 1 in 6 chance of out a different magic sword. If one is pulled at random. And maybe I'll add a little table later to figure out the different types of magic swords that could show up or that you might accidentally pull. So let's just have arrow go down there. We'll sort of flesh that out a little bit later. Do I plan this stuff out? I did a little bit of planning. I have like a little page of just random notes over here, a little bit off screen. Looks like this. It just has a bunch of ideas. And then over time, I slowly, over the course of today, really didn't take very long. I would have a list of ideas and then just add one interesting thing to all of them, usually connecting them in some way, and then go through it again and add another interesting thing to each of them. And so after, just 1 or 2 rounds of that, you have a number of weird things that are connected in some way and have a little bit more of a rationale to them. And you usually don't need a whole lot more than that. My tendency is to overplan stuff. So I really try and dial that back and just put down what I need. Let's see. So I got a tower over here. This is the Tower Dolorous. And this tower was originally used to broadcast peril or any bad news basically throughout this kingdom. But the tower has since fallen and is as unused. So there used to be this really powerful horn in there that you could blow that would create this loud sound that would echo throughout all of the nearby hexes. But since the kingdom fell, this is now in ruins. But the horn might still be there and could be useful for other things. A watchtower originally used to broadcast news of, let's say, a king's death. Via a magical horn. Now crumbling and ruinous. The tower has been occupied by a giant who has stolen the horn. So the reason why I wanted to have a horn in this is because you're on a mountain which is covered in snow, and that gives you the possibility of creating avalanches. So my whole idea here is that right now the giant has the horn. If you want the horn, you got to kill the giant or convince him to give it to you somehow. But because this is hexagon, it's divided into 6 wedges, and I've kind of sketched those in so they're pretty easy to see. And depending on which wedge that you're on this mountain, when you blow the horn, you can create an avalanche in that wedge of the mountain. If you're up in the snow area, then it's like a guaranteed chance. But if you're out of the snow area, then it's like maybe a 50-50 chance. And you can use that to cause like a large disaster in one area. And maybe if there's a big battle there, you can wipe out some enemies, or you can like bury the roads in between locations or something like that. The avalanche only. I'm not sure what to call each of these. I guess I can call it a wedge. Grey Wolf, let's see a comment here. Grey Wolf says, you actually got me interested in map making, make a homebrew world and presented it to my art teacher. Really liked it. That's really cool. Yeah, these can be really fun art projects. Though my focus here is really to just create something that's very gameable. So it has a lot of connections and a lot of things that can be messed with. So I'm trying to create, each of these has something weird going on with it that could cause interesting problems. Only affects the... Maybe I should just number each of these. 1, 2, 3, 4. If blown below the snow line, percent chance of succeeding. If above, 100% chance. Can only be blown once per day. Okay. So that way, if you're in some sort of like dangerous situation, maybe you're during a battle and you want to blow the avalanche just because maybe it'll save you by causing an avalanche. If you're down here, it may or may not work, but you can guarantee that it works if you're up here. So you can plan things out, right? If you actually want to like take out an area of the mountain, you can like go to that point on the mountain up in the snow area and blow it, and you'll be sure that it'll work. This allows for more planning. The giant has never blown the horn and doesn't know that it works. Just likes the way it looks. Okay. How long have you been into tabletop RPGs? I don't know, 5 years or so. I mean, I've known about them since I was a kid, and I played like a session or two as like a teenager, but I never got into them seriously until about 5 years ago, I would say, when I ran into Andrew Armstrong from Dawnforge Cast, and he got me into his home game. So I started playing Pathfinder and some 5th edition D&D, and then I just sort of split off into doing my own thing after that. Let's see. Let's draw in some roads here connecting these different parts of the map. So I'm imagining this a little bit as a point crawl where it's really about just traveling from place to place along roads. So you don't have to track, less that you have to track. You can just say, I'm going west along this road or whatever, and you just arrive there after an hour or so. Let's see. Let's have some roads. There's some paths connecting these two bandit camps down here at the bottom. And maybe the only way to get to the tower is going up from this area here. This will be kind of an intersection. I'll draw some switchbacks here. There we go. That seems pretty good. Maybe there's a road from here leading off the side of the map that way. The road leading off this way. I'm going to fill in a little bit more later, but let's get some trees and more detail on this mountain, just because I want it to look a little bit more fleshed out. Let's see. Let's go with this. So we can figure out which areas are more more wooded and which areas are not. Maybe you can add some shading with some shading pens as well. I think that would look pretty good. Yeah, Hex as a microcosm. It's a good way of thinking about it. A product that does that really well is actually Hot Springs Island, because that's like an island that has broken everything down into just a few hexes. Well, I think it's more like a couple dozen hexes, but each hex has a lot of detail, and it has like 3 different locations specific to each hex. I think that product does that really well. Yeah, let's have a lot of trees going down this side.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No problem. Oop, bump this, sorry. There we go. I believe forested over here. Imagining like a forest kind of running off the mountain in this direction. Having these pointy trees makes it look more like pine trees, which is what I want. Kind of create these shapes overlapping with each other. Seems to do the trick. And fill in more of those later. Let's get a little bit more texturing in. I'm imagining this area doesn't have quite as many trees. Perhaps it's a little bit more rocky. Add some sort of sharp slopes and some more hilly areas. And right over here, I want actually one more location. I'll fill in what that is a little bit later. It's fairly impassable to go in this direction if you wanted to cross straight across. The only way to get up to this location, you probably have to follow this river up by hanging on the banks of it. I'm imagining something like that. Okay. Let's put some more trees in over here. Trees are a bit more scattered over on this side. So thickly forested, lightly forested, or just like rocky and impassable. And over here, I'm not sure when we put it over there yet. Okay. See if I can shade this in a little bit. Get some of my shading pens. Where did I put those? There we go. Let's add maybe some darker shading higher up. All of this is really just an experiment. I've never actually tried to do this before, so you have to do kind of a second draft. That's okay. One that's not quite as dark as that. Let's see, oh, it's over here. Okay. You gotta be willing to just like try different stuff, right? Otherwise, you never really figure out what works and what doesn't. So let's put it down a couple other notes while I sort of flesh out where I want things to go here. So, yeah, so over here, that's going to be something important. I mean, that is going to be where a dragon is sleeping, because I want a full-on dragon in here. I see a couple questions popped up. Let's see. You can create a map like this, assembling some 6 triangles as the mountain, and track players' progress with thumbtacks. Yeah, you could do that. What scale do I use for my hexes? My hexes are usually 6-mile hexes, so about 6 miles from one side to the other. That works out well for a lot of mathematical reasons. If you Google a blog post called "In Praise of the 6-Mile Hex," it works out mathematically why having hexes be 6 miles wide works really well for a bunch of different reasons. And let's spread out some of these other descriptions here. Losing some of my pens. It's going to be the Alchemist Camp. So a bunch of the bandits are actually alchemists, because that makes them mechanically different than these guys. These guys are going to have, horses and armor and swords. These guys are going to have a lot of potions that they're brewing. So alchemy versus normal bandits, that'll make for interesting battles, right? And here we have the Ranger Camp. And then up here, we have, I wrote this down here. Yeah, that's going to be St. Festus's tomb, the saint whose sword is stuck in that tree over there. Let's put that up here. A standing stone engraved with Festus's last moments, slaying a giant serpent as he is engulfed in vines and flowers. That's gonna be the power of this dragon. It's a spring or a summer elemental, so it makes things grow. And we don't even know why Festus was trying to slay it, but he was killed in the process. light shading to some of this. Okay. So let's fill out more information about what's over here. Ooh, I need a little bit more information about Festus's tomb. The giant serpent has youth and golden vines and flowers. In the background is a waterfall. So if you look at this really closely, you can figure out two things. A, you're going to be able to figure out which sword is stuck in this tree over here that belonged to the saint that killed the dragon. And B, you're going to have a clue as to where the dragon is hiding, right? Because in the background of this engraving is going to be a waterfall. So where's a waterfall? Well, if you've been exploring around and you've been to the bandit camp, you found a river. And if you trace that river backwards, you're going to find the waterfall where the summer worm is sleeping. And it's just an elemental. It's not necessarily good or evil. You might be able to awake it and recruit it to your side, or perhaps slay it for, I don't know, body parts or something. It's really up to you, but that's how you're going to find it. A golden serpent of giant size is sleeping in a hedge of brambles guarded by thorn elementals. There is a waterfall nearby. So that connects up with that. I'm not sure how much more information I'm really going to put there. I guess I'll come back to that. Let's go with the bandit camp because that's one of the more important locations. Check the comments here. Add some laser books to your hex, dude. I don't know what that is. Maybe you're referring to something else. Yeah, I actually ran this summer worm before in a short adventure I ran for my 5th graders. It was really fun. It was in like this really snowbound area, and they woke up this spring elemental dragon-like creature, and they managed to convince it to be on their side, and they took out this enemy fortification. This dragon was like rampaging around, biting people, and it would like sprout flowers out of their bodies as they died. It was pretty cool. All of the bandits have horses, and they prefer to fight with spears. I like to give each faction some sort of unique thing in terms of how they operate and fight, just to make things more dynamic when you actually have a battle. Because you have multiple sides that fight in very different ways. It makes things more interesting. So we have an Alchemist Camp here. Splinter group of bandits who have broken away to form their own faction. In combat, let's say there's a lot less of them, but I'm going to make them more powerful. In combat, the alchemists throw bombs. And drink potions to enhance their abilities. Okay, so what do their potions do? Let's give a couple examples. D6 table. 1 bear form. To what else? Invisibility. 3 flaming skin. 4 what else? Flaming skin. Some other things that could be useful up in the mountains. Command trees. Make the trees fight for you. 5 super strength. I misspelled strength. Yikes. 6 one more good thing I could do. Again, you want them to all be very different. cloud. There we go. Let's see some more questions here. What's it like running games for kids that young? I imagine have to tone things down, make things easier for them. At 5th grade, so these kids are mostly 10 years old. I don't at all. I run it super brutal, deadly. Usually about one of them dies per session because I run OSR games. They use like maze rats and stuff like that. It's not a big deal. They enjoy it. The games are more fun when you can actually die if you make a mistake because it makes them think smarter and play more intelligently. Okay, and let's have the ranger camp over here. They are at war. With all of the bandits. So all these three factions are fighting each other. So that gives the players opportunities to mess around with the factions. So for example, you could like try and ally with one of them or try and get two of them to make a temporary alliance to take out the third one, right? Meanwhile, you can unleash a dragon over here, which may or may not listen to what you have to say. That'll rampage around and possibly help you out. You can head to this tower where you can get a really powerful horn that can cause avalanches, and maybe you can mess things up that way to turn things to your advantage. Of course, the horn could also be very valuable. You can get a really powerful sword over here via clues on this thing, and the sword can help you kill the dragon if that's what you want it to do, or you can use it to help fight these guys. Right. So I want like a lot of ways that this thing could come together and be used in different ways. Good books with random tables for regions and similar stuff. Yeah, I was about to say Hubris, but Hubris is one of the best examples of that. My own Maze Rats game has tons of random tables for generating like areas of the wilderness, like features of mountains and rivers and forests and things like that. There aren't a whole lot of those. I wish there were more. I mean, Vorenheim's like the city version of that. And if you want something for like sci-fi or modern cities, there's Augmented Reality, which is a really great handbook for that. But there's not as many as you would think for randomly generating landscapes. It's definitely like a hole that needs to be filled a little bit more, I think. Yeah, a little bit more texture to the side of this mountain. Yeah, some more trees over here. This Alchemist Camp is going to have some trees around it that give it a bit of cover. I figured they wouldn't just be completely out in the open like that. What else is going on in the Rangers camp? With all of the bandits. They fight primarily with crossbows. And strike from cover. So they're going to be just setting up, ambush attacks here and there. This is also going to need a random table of encounters for when you're just wandering around, I think. Let's think of a few other magic swords that you could possibly pull out of this tree. Only hurts ghosts could be one option. What else? Makes the holder beautiful looking. That would be an interesting surprise to pull it out and find that was true. What else? It glows colors that reflect the holder's emotions. It's like a mood ring, but it's a sword. Or traps the souls of the slain. Those seem like good effects. So let's have a random table of different people that you might run into. Just that if you're wandering around, things don't stay static, right? There are people on the move, changing things up as you explore. There's a 2 in 6 chance of having an encounter. every time you move between locations. So what are the different things you can run into? I usually do D6 tables because they're really easy to write. So you could have the obvious ones. Bandits, alchemists, the rangers, of course. Might run into the giant. I imagine he mostly hangs up at this tower, but he might just be wandering around. You might run into him. And let's throw a couple wild cards in there. Let's have a lost merchant caravan and a wolf pack. And let's have a little table of what they are doing. That way you can roll on this to mix things up even more. Fighting with someone, roll on the encounter table. They could also be negotiating with someone. They could be just resting. That gives you a chance of surprising them and coming on them when they are unawares. They could be scavenging or hunting. They might be laboring or building something. Or they might be fleeing from someone else. So, for example, you could roll on this and you might get something like I run into a lost merchant caravan, and then you roll again and it says like they're fleeing from, and you roll again, fleeing from who? Fleeing from some rangers. So then you as the DM have to figure out, why is the merchant caravan running from the rangers? Maybe the rangers think that they're bandits. Maybe the caravan got lost and accidentally attacked the rangers. And so as this continues on, you're going to have a web of relations and factions warring with each other that's going to get more and more complex and make the world seem more alive. Let's see, I've got a question here. Do you ever get pushback from parents for running D&D for school children as a holdover from the Satanic Panic? Nope. I don't think that has ever happened as far as I'm aware. I had one parent that was worried that like it seemed violent, like her kid came back from the class, was very excited and was talking about how like she killed someone and was like, what are you doing in this class? So I said, it's not a big deal. Feel free to come in and sit in on the game if you want to. And she did. She just showed up at the next after school D&D club. She sat in on some of the game and was immediately like, oh yeah, this is fine, right? It's just pretend. So whenever you get pushback on that sort of thing, what I have always done is just invite that person to play with you or to sit in on a game. Just like, you think this is weird? That's fine. Watch a game actually in action. And when that happens, then usually their concerns just evaporate. Because usually it's just, lack of exposure. They don't know what it is. You want best bear friends? Okay, fine. Sort of bear friends. There you go. Got some bear friends on there. Let's see. I think that's about it. I basically got everything I wanted in here. I think it's just complex enough that you're going to have a lot of emergent narrative that's just going to show up as you play the game. I don't want to try and shoehorn too much stuff in there because you don't want to plan out how things are going to go. You really want to allow the players to do that on their own and to take responsibility for that. And you have, as a DM, you have to be willing to be surprised and to roll with the punches. I think that's a really critical skill. Let me color in these locations and make them easier to see. A tower up there. A tree over there. That looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with this. I mean, my handwriting isn't all that great, but I'm happy with the content. I might add some more details, maybe flesh out some of these camps a little bit more, make some NPCs have a little bit more detail. But this is the sort of thing that I'm making for my patrons over on Patreon, right? I do something like this every month, and they get the PDF version of it, and they can print it out and run it for themselves. If you need something really quick for a session that night, you can pull out one of these and it's pretty much good to go. There's not a lot of like monster stats. I don't have any stat blocks in here, but you can pretty much stick in stuff from whatever game you're running. Like most people are running D&D. So my stuff is usually, monsters, you got a dragon, you got some rangers, you got some bandits. It's stuff that you can pretty much just stick in, use the stats that whatever game you have uses, or you can make them up on the fly. I mostly run OSR games, so the stats of monsters are usually very simple. So it's not a big deal to just improv them. I've always found the more difficult part is coming up with a setup that's interesting and has a lot of potential variety. And that's what I'm trying to offer my patrons. So if you guys want to get the PDFs of this and all the previous ones that I've done, you can head over to my Patreon. And if you want to join me, you can get some of those. I think I'm going to wrap it up now, but thanks for hanging out, guys. I don't know if these Sunday mapping sessions are all that interesting. I'm mostly just, drawing here by myself, but it's cool to have people hang out and comment on it. What mega dungeons would I recommend? I've heard that Barrow Maze is very good. I have not read Barrow Maze yet, but I'm planning on doing that pretty soon. Blue Medusa is a very good dungeon, but it is difficult to run. Not because it's like badly laid out. In fact, it's extremely well laid out. It's just that a lot of the rooms in Blue Medusa are very strange. And so that can make it a little bit difficult to run just because there's so much weirdness going on. Whereas a lot of more classical mega dungeons, each room is fairly simple. So it's not a big deal to get it going. Yep. Thanks for watching, everybody. See you guys later.